Chairman. Secretary Heyman, you mentioned our exit policy. Before I get into other border security issues, I would like to just talk a little bit about the Boston City bomber. As best I can understand, we have a system that should be tracking that and should be pinging, and it's we've got the text system, the Treasury Enforcement Communication System, where suspect number one, I guess, was pinged, and that information came into an individual in the Department of Homeland Security. Can you just describe that process to me?
Sure. What you have is an IT system that, in advance of a person's departure or arrival to or from the United States, usually somewhere around 72 hours in advance of that, sends a message called the hot list if there is an individual to take a look at or take a second look at. That individual, this is all done in CBP land, and the customs officials, in that case, if there is an active case or something that deserves additional look from the FBI, for example, it's sent to the specific Joint Terrorism Task Force that's overseeing that, and that's what happened.
Okay, now, what, in this specific case, Tamerlan Tsarnaev was actually pinged, and somebody in Department of Homeland Security did receive that information, correct? An individual?
Correct.
Did that information get disseminated anywhere, or did that just dead end right there?
I don't have the specifics on that, but that individual serves in the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, so the process is basically that they all share that information. When you're serving on it, you're sitting next to each other and you're all working together. So
has the department really evaluated what happened there? Do you have an answer on that? I mean, can you provide that to our office?
There's a briefing for you and your staff on Friday, a classified briefing. They'll go into all of those details. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let me just talk just in general the history of border security. I think we've really made a pretty long attempt here over the since the mid-70s, mid-80s to try and secure the border. Apparently with some progress, but we continue to say, well, we need more resources. I think one of our first hearings with Secretary Napolitano, I asked her, well, how much would it cost to secure the border? And her response was, we have enough resources. I think this bill is going to be spending, what, another $4.5 billion. What do we spend per year on border security right now, approximately? And anybody know?
I think if you combine the CBP and ICE budgets, that's a number I've seen before. It's in the upwards of $15 billion.
Okay. Do you think another $4.5 billion is going to make any further impact on that? I mean, are we just going to continue to throw resources at the problem?
I don't think so. I think the framework laid out in the immigration reform bill targets some of the key areas, some additional capabilities with technology for surveillance between ports of entry and the southwest border, additional officers at ports of entry, which is an area where we've seen tremendous growth in trade and travel in all environments that we need to keep up with to make sure we can secure and facilitate it appropriately, and addressing legal immigration pathways as well as employers in the interior. I think those are investments that will advance border security and move us forward.
I know the bill lays out a process where the department, I guess, lays out another plan for securing the border. I mean, do we not have that plan? I mean, do we have to do this again? I mean, how many times have we developed a plan for trying to secure our border?
And I do think we have a good foundation for that plan, as Secretary Napolitano has stated. I think in the context of the bill, providing a specific roadmap that can be measured against and evaluated, it seems like an important aspect.
Are we just doing more of the same, Ms. Richards? I mean, you talked about planning, and we hear this all the time. I've been here now for a little more than 2 years, and I hear the same bureaucratic answers over and over again. Well, we have to plan, we have to execute, and of course, we always need more resources. But it doesn't seem like we've made all that much progress. We certainly haven't secured the border. Maybe we're making progress, but we always hear we're making progress. Are we really?
Well, I'd like to differentiate between the plan to secure the border that you're talking about and the planning that I was talking about in my testimony, which is much more detailed, having to do with the equipment and the personnel and getting the actual down to the nitty-gritty where the rubber meets the road resources to the right spot on the border when they need it. The planning that I'm talking about is if you're going to buy a certain kind of aircraft, what does it need to be on the aircraft, and how many do we need, and so how many pilots do we need, and how many mechanics do we need? That's the kind of detailed planning that I would like to see the department do before they spend the money that's identified in this legislation to implement the broader plan of securing the border through greater surveillance and technology.
Okay, so the department spends approximately $50 billion per year. We're not doing that planning now with the $50 billion we're already spending?
I can, of course, can only speak to the programs that we've audited, and in those programs, we have found that they are not doing a good job of doing those detailed plans before they spend the money.
I've sat through hearings now for a couple of years, and we continue to hear about spotters on mountains. Why don't we take those people out? What prevents us from, why do we continue to have spotters for the drug lords in America sitting on top of mountains providing that information? What prevents us from taking them out?
Senator, I'll take that question. One, first of all, in the environments in which we operate within our mission space is a law enforcement environment, very much different in terms of rules of engagement and what we can or can't do in the comparative that the chairman talked about in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. The rules of engagement, what we call our use of force, applies to individuals on the street or whether they're up on mountaintop. So it makes it a little bit more difficult in terms of what we actually do once we've identified them to actually get to them. We have plans in place. We, in fact, have removed many of those spotters. We are continuing to degrade the capability of those organizations that utilize spotters up on those mountains, but it continues to be a significant threat and a continued persistence on our part to be able to mitigate that.
Just a quick estimate, how many spotters are there? How many have you taken out?
I don't have that number off the top of my head.
How many have you taken out? I mean, you say you've taken some out.
Dozens, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.